As we venture into 2025, Asia, a continent celebrated for its cultural richness and economic dynamism, faces significant turbulence. Among the nations grappling with profound challenges, three stand out: China, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. These countries are teetering on the brink of economic, political, and social collapse. This video examines the underlying factors contributing to their precarious positions, exploring the interplay of internal and external pressures that have brought them to this juncture. So, here is the list of 10 Asian countries will collapse soon. Before we start, make sure you subscribe to the channel and comment your thought. Here we go. Number 10. China. The fragility behind the superpower facade, economic slowdown, and the real estate crisis. China's meteoric rise as an economic superpower has been a defining story of the 21st century. However, the once unquestionable growth engine is sputtering. The real estate sector, contributing nearly 30% of China's GDP, is in dire straits. Major developers like Evergrande and Country Garden have defaulted on debt obligations, leaving millions of homeowners and investors in limbo. The government's attempts to stabilize the sector through bailouts and easing monetary policy have yet to yield significant results. Simultaneously, local government debt, fueled by overambitious infrastructure projects, has reached unsustainable levels, creating a liquidity crisis at provincial levels. Demographic decline. China's population shrank in 2022 for the first time in 6 decades, a trend set to accelerate. The consequences of decades of the one-child policy have left the country with an aging workforce and a shrinking consumer base. This demographic shift is choking economic vitality, undermining China's ability to sustain growth. Political instability and authoritarian overreach. President Xi Jinping's consolidation of power has alienated domestic and international stakeholders. His policies, from stringent zero-COVID lockdowns to a crackdown on private enterprises, have created an atmosphere of uncertainty and fear. Widespread protests in late 2022 highlighted simmering public discontent. As the economic pain deepens, political unrest could resurface, challenging the Communist Party's grip on power. Geopolitical isolation. China's assertive stance in territorial disputes, particularly in the South China Sea and over Taiwan, has strained relations with neighbors and the West. Sanctions and trade restrictions imposed by the US and EU further exacerbate economic woes. Should the decoupling from global supply chains intensify, China's manufacturing-dependent economy may face catastrophic fallout. Number 9. Pakistan. A nation in perpetual crisis. Economic freefall. Pakistan's economy is in shambles. Burdened by a staggering external debt of over $120 billion and persistently high fiscal deficits, the country remains on the verge of default. Inflation, exceeding 30% in 2024, has decimated purchasing power, pushing millions into poverty. The reliance on periodic bailouts from the International Monetary Fund (IMF) has created a cycle of dependency without addressing structural issues. Political turmoil. The ousting of former Prime Minister Imran Khan and subsequent legal battles have plunged Pakistan into political chaos. Successive governments have failed to inspire confidence, with widespread allegations of corruption and ineptitude. The military, long a dominant force in Pakistani politics, faces waning public support due to perceived mismanagement and interference in civilian affairs. Security challenges. The resurgence of the Taliban Pakistan (TTP) and escalating tensions with India over Kashmir have heightened security concerns. Cross-border skirmishes and domestic terrorist attacks have strained Pakistan's already limited resources. The internal conflict between ethnic and sectarian groups adds another layer of instability. Climate vulnerabilities. Pakistan's susceptibility to climate change has worsened the humanitarian crisis. The devastating floods of 2022 displaced millions, and recurring natural disasters continue to hamper recovery efforts. The agricultural sector, a cornerstone of the economy, suffers from water scarcity and declining productivity, exacerbating food insecurity. Number 8. Sri Lanka. From economic meltdown to uncertain recovery, debt distress and IMF dependency, Sri Lanka's economy imploded in 2022, with its first-ever sovereign default marking a turning point. Despite securing a $2.9 billion IMF bailout, the road to recovery remains fraught with challenges. Public debt, exceeding 120% of GDP, stifles development initiatives, while austerity measures imposed by international creditors deepen public discontent. Political dysfunction. The ousting of the Rajapaksa regime in 2022 provided a brief moment of hope, but political infighting and ineffective governance persist. Successive administrations have struggled to implement reforms necessary for long-term stability, such as reducing corruption and improving transparency. Social unrest and public discontent. The economic collapse has eroded public trust in institutions. Rising unemployment and inflation have fueled protests, with citizens demanding accountability and justice. Ethnic tensions between Sinhalese, Tamil, and Muslim communities remain unresolved, threatening national cohesion. Environmental and tourism challenges. Sri Lanka's tourism sector, a vital revenue stream, has yet to fully recover from the twin shocks of the Easter Sunday attacks in 2019 and the COVID-19 pandemic. Environmental degradation, including deforestation and coastal erosion, further undermines prospects for sustainable growth. Number 7. Myanmar, a nation in turmoil. Political instability. Myanmar's descent into chaos began with the military coup of February 2021, which ousted the democratically elected government led by Aung San Suu Kyi. The junta's oppressive rule has led to widespread protests, violent crackdowns, and an ongoing civil war. The military's inability to establish effective governance has resulted in a fragmented state, with ethnic armed groups and pro-democracy forces controlling significant portions of the country. Economic collapse. The political turmoil has devastated Myanmar's economy. International sanctions, coupled with the withdrawal of foreign investment, have crippled key industries such as manufacturing and agriculture. The kyat, Myanmar's currency, has plummeted in value, leading to hyperinflation and widespread poverty. With over 40% of the population living below the poverty line, Myanmar faces a humanitarian crisis of unprecedented proportions. Humanitarian catastrophe. The conflict has displaced over 2 million people, many of whom are living in dire conditions in refugee camps or internally displaced persons (IDP) settlements. Access to basic necessities such as food, clean water, and healthcare is severely limited. The United Nations has warned of a potential famine, exacerbated by the junta's restrictions on humanitarian aid. Geopolitical isolation. Myanmar's isolation from the international community has deepened. Regional powers, including China and India, have struggled to mediate the crisis, while Western nations have imposed sanctions. The lack of a coordinated international response has allowed the junta to maintain its grip on power, further entrenching the country's downward spiral. Number 6. Bhutan, a nation struggling in isolation. Economic challenges. Unlike Myanmar, Bhutan's crisis is not driven by political instability, but by economic vulnerabilities. Bhutan's economy relies heavily on hydropower exports to India, which account for over 20% of its GDP. However, declining demand and delays in infrastructure projects have significantly reduced revenue. Additionally, Bhutan's tourism sector, a vital source of foreign exchange, has yet to recover fully from the COVID-19 pandemic. Rising debt. Bhutan's external debt has ballooned to over 120% of its GDP, driven by loans taken to finance hydropower projects. The debt burden limits the government's ability to invest in critical sectors such as healthcare and education. The country's reliance on Indian financial support further exposes it to external shocks and geopolitical pressures. Demographic challenges. Bhutan's population is aging rapidly, with a declining birth rate and a significant portion of its youth migrating abroad for better opportunities. This demographic shift threatens the sustainability of the labor force and places additional strain on social welfare systems. Environmental vulnerabilities. Bhutan's commitment to being a carbon-negative nation is admirable but comes with challenges. Climate change has led to glacial melting and unpredictable weather patterns, which threaten hydropower generation and agricultural productivity. The country's dependence on natural resources makes it highly susceptible to environmental shocks. Number 5. Afghanistan, a nation adrift in chaos. Economic implosion. Since the Taliban's return to power in August 2021, Afghanistan's economy has suffered catastrophic setbacks. The cessation of international aid, which previously accounted for over 70% of the national budget, has left the country in financial freefall. The United Nations estimates that over 90% of Afghans live below the poverty line, with millions facing acute food insecurity. The Taliban's inability to establish a functioning economic framework has exacerbated the crisis. Their archaic governance and isolationist policies have deterred foreign investment and trade. The banking sector is paralyzed, with strict withdrawal limits imposed to prevent a complete collapse of financial institutions. Humanitarian catastrophe. Afghanistan's humanitarian crisis is one of the world's most severe. Over 28 million people, more than two-thirds of the population, require humanitarian assistance. Prolonged droughts and the effects of climate change have devastated agricultural output, compounding food shortages. Healthcare services are on the brink of collapse, with hospitals lacking essential supplies and staff. The repressive policies of the Taliban, particularly against women and girls, have marginalized half the population, further crippling the country's human capital. Security concerns. The Taliban's promises of peace have proven hollow. The resurgence of ISIS-K, Islamic State Khorasan Province, and internal divisions within the Taliban rank and file have led to increased violence. Frequent attacks on civilians and infrastructure have created an atmosphere of perpetual insecurity. Geopolitical isolation. The international community's refusal to formally recognize the Taliban government has further isolated Afghanistan. Sanctions and frozen assets have hindered any semblance of economic recovery. Without international engagement, Afghanistan risks becoming a breeding ground for terrorism, exacerbating global security concerns. Number 4. Lebanon, a state in freefall. Economic meltdown. Lebanon's economic collapse, described by the World Bank as one of the worst in modern history, shows no signs of abating. The Lebanese pound has lost over 98% of its value since 2019, wiping out savings and plunging millions into poverty. Inflation has soared to unprecedented levels, making basic necessities unaffordable for most citizens. The banking system remains paralyzed, with depositors unable to access their funds. Rampant corruption and mismanagement have eroded public trust in financial institutions and the government. The lack of a coherent economic recovery plan has left Lebanon in a state of perpetual crisis. Political paralysis. Lebanon's political system, based on sectarian power sharing, has proven incapable of addressing the country's myriad crises. The inability to elect a president or form a functional government has created a power vacuum, exacerbating instability. Widespread protests and strikes reflect the growing disillusionment of the population. The influence of Hezbollah, backed by Iran, has further polarized the political landscape. International donors have conditioned aid on the implementation of reforms, but the entrenched political elite's resistance to change has stalled progress. Humanitarian crisis. Lebanon's population has been swelled by over 1.5 million Syrian refugees, placing immense strain on resources. Public services, including electricity, water, and healthcare, are on the verge of collapse. The recent cholera outbreak highlights the dire state of public health infrastructure. Regional and global implications. Lebanon's collapse poses significant risks for regional stability. Its strategic location in the Middle East makes it a key player in geopolitical dynamics. The spillover effects of Lebanon's instability could exacerbate tensions in neighboring Syria, Israel, and beyond. Number 3. Bangladesh, an economic and environmental ticking time bomb. Economic struggles and over-reliance on exports. Bangladesh's economy has long been driven by its garment industry, which accounts for over 80% of its exports. However, the global demand for textiles has been declining due to economic slowdowns in key markets like Europe and North America. Rising production costs and increased competition from countries like Vietnam and Cambodia have further strained the industry. Small and medium enterprises, SMEs, the backbone of Bangladesh's economy, are also struggling due to a lack of access to affordable credit. Inflation, hovering around 9% in late 2024, has eroded purchasing power, worsening the living conditions of millions. The Taka's depreciation against major currencies has made imports more expensive, further exacerbating the economic crisis. Political instability and governance challenges. The Awami League government, led by Sheikh Hasina, faces growing opposition. Allegations of electoral fraud, suppression of dissent, and corruption have sparked widespread protests. The opposition coalition has gained momentum, but the political landscape remains polarized. Governance failures, including bureaucratic inefficiency and weak rule of law, have hindered progress on critical reforms. Climate change, a looming catastrophe. Bangladesh's vulnerability to climate change poses an existential threat. Rising sea levels threaten to submerge vast portions of its low-lying deltaic region, displacing millions. Frequent cyclones, floods, and riverbank erosion have devastated agriculture, leading to food insecurity. Efforts to adapt, such as constructing embankments and promoting climate-resilient crops, are insufficient in the face of the escalating crisis. Social unrest and migration pressures, economic hardship, and environmental displacement have fueled social unrest. Protests over job losses, inflation, and inadequate disaster relief have become commonplace. Many citizens are seeking opportunities abroad, contributing to a surge in illegal migration. Neighboring India has tightened border security, leading to tensions between the two countries. Number 2. Laos, a debt-ridden nation in freefall. Debt dependency and economic mismanagement. Laos's economic woes stem largely from its reliance on external debt. The nation's ambitious infrastructure projects, particularly under China's Belt and Road Initiative BRI, have resulted in unsustainable debt levels. By 2024, public debt had exceeded 100% of GDP, with much of it owed to Chinese lenders. Economic mismanagement compounds the problem. Corruption, inefficient public spending, and a lack of diversification have left Laos overly dependent on hydropower exports. Declining demand from Thailand and Vietnam, its primary electricity buyers, has reduced foreign exchange earnings, exacerbating the fiscal crisis. Currency devaluation and inflation. The kip, Laos's currency, has experienced a sharp devaluation, losing over 40% of its value against the US dollar since 2023. This has driven up the cost of imports, leading to inflation rates above 25%. Basic goods, including food and fuel, are now unaffordable for many, plunging a significant portion of the population into poverty. Environmental challenges. Laos's reliance on hydropower has brought environmental costs. Dam projects have disrupted river ecosystems, displacing communities and reducing fish stocks, a critical protein source for rural populations. The nation also faces deforestation and land degradation, which threaten agricultural productivity, political repression, and public discontent. The Lao People's Revolutionary Party, LPRP, the country's one-party government, faces increasing criticism for its inability to address the crisis. Political repression, including censorship, surveillance, and crackdowns on protests, has stifled dissent but failed to quell public frustration. The lack of transparency and accountability has eroded trust in government institutions. Number 1. The Maldives. Paradise on the brink. Climate change and rising sea levels. The Maldives is globally recognized as one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change, with 80% of its 1,200 islands sitting less than 1 meter above sea level. Rising ocean levels pose an existential threat. Projections indicate that by 2050, many of its islands could become uninhabitable, and some may disappear entirely. The increased frequency of extreme weather events, such as storm surges, cyclones, and coral bleaching, has already disrupted livelihoods dependent on fishing and tourism. Coral reefs, vital to the marine ecosystem and the country's tourism sector, are deteriorating rapidly due to rising sea temperatures and acidification. Economic overdependence on tourism. Tourism contributes over 30% of the Maldives' GDP and employs a significant portion of its population. However, global economic uncertainties, coupled with environmental degradation, have led to declining visitor numbers. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the fragility of this dependence, and recovery remains slow despite international efforts to promote sustainable tourism. The high cost of maintaining and developing infrastructure on remote islands, combined with declining revenue, has exacerbated the fiscal deficit. The Maldives is heavily reliant on external borrowing, with public debt exceeding 100% of GDP by 2024. Debt servicing obligations have left little room for climate adaptation projects or social welfare initiatives. Political instability and governance challenges. Political turbulence has been a recurring theme in Maldivian history. Successive governments have struggled to balance environmental priorities with economic development. Allegations of corruption, nepotism, and human rights violations have eroded public trust in institutions. The growing influence of external powers, particularly China and India, has further complicated governance, with the Maldives caught in a geopolitical tug-of-war. The conclusion. So, guys, this was the 10 European countries that will collapse soon. Hope you will like it and appreciate it. The potential collapse of China, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka serves as a stark reminder of the interconnected nature of governance, economy, and society. While their challenges are distinct, their trajectories highlight the importance of resilience and adaptability in navigating an increasingly uncertain world. The fate of these nations will not only shape their futures, but also have profound implications for regional and global stability. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and press the bell icons for latest upcoming travel videos. Bye-bye. See you